Hi guys, it's Stephanie and hope everyone is having an amazing day. You are tuned into the review of Married at First Sight season 6 episode 12. So we are getting very close to the end. These couples are getting close to the end of the 8 weeks and things are starting to get a little more heated in terms of their energy, them thinking, okay, in a couple of weeks is decision day and I kind of have to decide. So you're starting to see some, self-sabotage, some anxious energy, more effort. We're starting to see a lot of things. This episode was kind of all over the place for me. But I'm going to unpack it as best as I can, and I'm kind of going to do it a little different this time because I'm going to kind of give you tips on each person as a couple and also individually, because I watched the couples this time shined. Just an overview of this episode. There were times that each couple had their own experience, and we got to see that. There are times that we get to see people having conversations individually or with other people outside of the relationship, like family. And then there are times where the couples got together in groups. So the guys once again got together and the girls once again got together, which I think is like an amazing thing. People have been talking about the different seasons, and I started watching in season 3. So I have started to watch the older ones just to see how things have changed, and a lot has changed. And one of the biggest things that we've talked about in the change is actually having the couples interact, and it's huge. It's made such a big difference because they have someone who they can identify with who's going through whatever they're going through. So I think it's great. I'm loving seeing them in interact in different activities, go to each other's houses, which happened this episode, and kind of use each other as support. So that was really, really good. Jumping right in, this is like a very heavy family episode. So now we're getting closer to the end. We started out with family at the beginning, and then, everybody kind of matriculated through friendships and doing things individually and using each other as support, and now we're back to family. Everybody's family wasn't involved, but let's kick it off with the first couple. So Molly and John, I like where they are right now. Don't stone me, because I know some people are like over Molly. I like where they are. I see like huge growth. We're kind of moving beyond the whole physical thing. It's important. Like, we're not going to deny that it's important, but the pressure is off. And that's kind of what we have been talking about. Her feeling pressured, him kind of putting the pressure on her, regardless of his justified feelings. The demand for intimacy is not a turn on. So that clearly wasn't working. And now they're both in a space where they're kind of just in a good groove. They're doing things together. They're operating at their strength. So getting active and doing new things together. And they are having a really good time. And specifically for John, I think that he is seeing the significance in taking the pressure off, even though he may not want to, but he's getting like the good feelings that she's giving him. She's opening up. They go rock climbing. Molly plans like a cute date for him, and they go rock climbing together. And as he's coming down, he kind of leans over for a kiss, and she goes in for it, which, sounds so simple, but once again, she hasn't been doing it. So it was really good to see that she was kind of flirty and comfortable in that way, because that's kind of the norm of a couple. You high five your man or your lady, and you give him a kiss, and it's just very comfortable. There's nothing, awkward about it, or there's nothing pressured. And it's, for her, who's really not done much in that category, she is kind of embracing him and saying her feelings are growing, and she is enjoying not having that pressure on her. They spend time with her family, and he paints the house, and what you're seeing is that he gels. They paint a room, and he gels with her siblings and her mom, and that's really good to see. If you guys notice, the dynamic is that he's the only male there, and unfortunately her father passed away. I don't remember when. I'm sure it was more recent than long ago, but I'm not sure when. But they have been missing kind of that energy, that male energy and that influence. And I'm pretty sure it's really difficult, to miss, the patriarch of your family and kind of have this new guy here. And I'm sure some of her apprehension has to do with some sort of daddy issues, not in a negative way, but some unresolved issues. And you're seeing him kind of come in and be able to gel with these women, and they're open and they feel comfortable and they feel safe and there's no pressure. And your family's opinion is a big deal. We try to say it's just us two, and it's not a Romeo and Juliet thing. Like, family really matters, and you can't let family, disrupt your union. You have to be careful about that. But you do ideally want positive vibes, because it is an entrance into a family. There's a whole microcosm of people already there, and you kind of want to kind of infiltrate on both sides. So it was good to see him kind of just come in and have a good time and to be well received, because she sent him over for dinner, to go get dinner for them. And she's talking with her sisters, and of course she's still apprehensive, saying the relationship has been a roller coaster, as we've seen, but they also have really good things to say. And Molly is not like over him in terms of, I'm completely sure I don't want to do this. She has good feelings, and she's pondering, which is a good sign for her. And she's learning to relax. She even says, I've been overly analytical and, kind of just essentially doing too much. And so she's enjoying herself and kind of being cognizant of where they are now. So that was really good to see. I think on her end, it's showing growth, it's showing self-reflection, it's showing accountability of her own actions, which the last few weeks, it was difficult to watch, and we weren't seeing so much of that. On John's end, it's showing growth as well in being able to pull himself back, and also not comparing himself to his past relationships or past interactions. So I think part of his issue, valid as it may be, is, hey, in all these other situations, I've had, women, coming at me all the time, and I've never had issues in that. Well, for whatever reason, this situation is different. So instead of being so frustrated because the situation isn't the same, it's kind of recognizing it for what it is. And that's huge. That's growth, because we all do that. We all compare ourselves to our best version of ourselves, or past relationships, or past jobs, or anything. Why isn't it working like that? Well, it doesn't matter, because you are where you are. And so you need to focus on where you are and how to make that better. It's kind of like the grass isn't always greener type of thing. So he's watering his own grass, and he's seeing things grow. So I love seeing that from the two of them. Let's see, I'm gonna jump around. I'm gonna kind of do the couples first, and then I'm gonna go to like guys night and girls night. So the next couple, Jephte and Shawniece, I think that this is kind of what we wanted to see from them. Oddly enough, the funny thing is, Jephte is actually probably the most sane of them all, and he even says that, which is so funny. He's giving really solid feedback to the guys. He's interacting with his wife so well. They're interacting together. They have this very casual, jokey relationship, which is mostly what marriage can be. If you have a good dynamic, you want to have fun. People say, I want to marry my best friend, and sometimes that sounds so corny, but ideally you want to be with somebody that you can laugh and joke with, and they don't take you seriously, and it's just very casual, very fun. You can talk about kids, you talk about family. They had a good conversation about how many kids they want to have, and how they want their family dynamic to look like. And I thought it was really interesting, because they were talking about, who comes first, your spouse or your children. And I know this probably could be another video in itself, but Jephte was saying the children should come first, because he feels like they should be prioritized. And then when they get older, then you kind of let it go, and you go back, not go back to your spouse, but essentially go back to your spouse being first. And Shawniece illustrated how her aunt and her uncle kind of put their marriage first, and the kids were secondary, because eventually your kids grow up, they leave, they have their own families, and so they're not focused on you, and you can't be focused on them, and you're now left with the spouse that essentially, if you put your kids first, you've been ignoring the whole time, and so you don't even know each other anymore. So how detrimental that could be to the marriage. I actually agree with that. I feel like sometimes when people hear that and they get frustrated with, the kids have to come first, I don't think they're thinking about it from a logical perspective. I think they're thinking about it emotionally, in terms of like, well, kids need attention, and sometimes they need to be prioritized. I absolutely agree with that. I mean, if we're just going to be logical about it, sometimes they do. But I think if you created a hierarchy of how things should go, your spouse and yourself should go before them. I mean, the kids essentially come, from the two of you. And it is important to nurture that relationship continuously as you have kids. But because a lot of times, and if you're disagreeing, I'm just going to say something. A lot of times relationships suffer because this one spouse idolizes children over the other spouse, and so that spouse feels obsolete. So it's really important to be careful of how you set that up, and both mom and dad should be on the same page with that, so that there is no splitting, because kids can see that they start to split, and they start to see, okay, mom is going to say yes, or dad's going to say yes, or somebody's going to undercut, and it just starts to get very ugly. So you don't want to do that. But I love seeing them have that conversation, because it shows that they are getting really comfortable with each other and actually seeing each other in the future. He even says, this is like what I was wanting it to be, and I'm really happy. And they talk about where they're able to really see relationships, where he was able to see a relationship. And he talked about his father briefly kind of saying to him when he was a young boy, I'm never going to marry your mother, which now he knows is inappropriate to even say. So he's admitting that he has had like a dysfunctional upbringing in terms of seeing what marriage is. He really didn't see it, so he kind of took to what he could see. So certain TV shows, I think it was like My Wife and Kids or something like that. I'm sure Cosby or whatever. And she basically had someone that she could relate to in terms of her aunt and her uncle. That is really important because we tend to mimic what we see, good, bad, or ugly. So kind of recognizing, having that conversation was so awesome to see, because it also helps you shape your expectation and helps you share your expectation. Sometimes we don't know. We go into a relationship or marriage and we say, oh, this is what it's supposed to be. Well, where did that come from? And really, are you able to expect that in a fair way? And also, if you expect something, be prepared to have something expected of you. So now, are you able to show up in that way? And sometimes people don't even have that conversation or even know what they need. So I really enjoyed seeing them go beyond the surface and talk about that stuff. I wish I would have seen their families. Like, I feel like their families have been missing, kind of. We've seen Shawniece with her mom like one time a few weeks ago, and we haven't seen Shawniece and his family. But I would love to see more of that, because I know a lot of all of our backgrounds comes from family, but a lot of what we've seen from him, I'm sure, has a lot to do with his mom and dad, or lack thereof. So I would have enjoyed seeing that. We really haven't seen them since the beginning, but all in all, they're on the up and up. Really enjoy them. They're doing really well. Jephte individually is doing well. He's giving really good advice, as I said. As you've seen in the guys' night, he's a lot more comfortable. He's willing to be uncomfortable, which is huge for him. He even says he's stubborn, but he's working on it. So we're seeing him really like man up, essentially, and kind of give us the Jephte that we've been begging for, and really being accountable to his wife. So in the times, and I'll get to it, when the times when he's talking to someone about what they should and shouldn't do, he's aware of what he should and shouldn't do based on having to now be accountable to a wife, which is huge growth on him, because 2 weeks ago we saw him walk out, but even then he was smart enough to kind of like phone a friend, and get that. Shawniece, I think she is a lot more she's almost blossoming, because she's a lot more comfortable, given that he's now opened himself up. And looking back on it, it's probably a tough spot for her to be in, because she never knew which way was up or down, because he was so cold. And so that had her kind of emotionally unstable, so we get to see her be more of like just a relaxed woman, finding her own, figuring out what her wife style is, figuring out what she wants to be and how their dynamic is. And she's a lot more stable. The emotions don't run up and down in a way that's like, a little scary. She's still like very emotional, and that's just her. She's very expressive, but it's not in a way that you see is kind of like detrimental to her being, because we watched her fall apart for a little bit because she didn't really know what was going on, and I get it. So it's good to see that growth in her. All right, so Jackie and Ryan. Um, so last week I went on a rant about Ryan because he was driving me crazy, and not much changed. I'm not gonna go on a rant, at least I'm gonna attempt not to, but I just I don't see this working out. And if it does, I don't see it working out for her. I think that she is really trying. I think Jackie really wants it. She is being um, cooperative. She's compromising. She's not really asking for too much. In this episode, we see Ryan lying. I mean, just bold-faced lying and kind of changing the story and making it a little bit more than what it's supposed to be. So at the beginning, they go to his parents' house and they have, lunch or I don't know, lunch, breakfast, something like that. And his parents are showing her pictures, and she's so like sweetly and blissfully unaware, because she's like, oh, I can, if things continue to go as they are, yeah, I could totally see us having a family. And I'm like, why? Based on recent events. And he is sitting there, and it's somewhere in the confessional he says, kind of because they got married at first sight and it's a very different experience, that he doesn't think that they can have a family, or not a family, a relationship like his parents. Here's another aspect, and we talked last week about self-sabotage. Here's another aspect of self-sabotage, kind of shooting you in your foot before you even really start the race. How could you say that just because it didn't start off traditionally? And why would you say that? If you're really working hard to be a part of this union and make it work, why would you kind of stop it before it really starts and say that it doesn't have the propensity to reach a certain place? That doesn't really make sense. It seems like he's not wanting it to reach a certain place because he's getting uncomfortable. Ryan doesn't like to be uncomfortable. We even hear throughout this episode that he says, I want to be the way that I want to be. And he says that his hope was that his wife would, meet him and be okay with who he was, and she'd be okay with who he is. And the irony is, he's not okay with who she is, because she wants to travel and he's not even willing to compromise. And I think she would 100% compromise. She wants to live in another country for a year. I'm sure she would take an extended vacation or do a couple of months if he was willing to do that. She's kind of willing to do whatever would make the relationship work, and he doesn't like what she's bringing to the table in terms of desires in life. He's not accepting of that, yet he wants her to accept him as he is, which is someone who doesn't want to grow. He takes 2 steps forward, 4 steps back. So in 2 steps forward, he'll say, I want to change a little bit, but then he'll say, I don't want to change at all. Literally in the same sentence. Like, I'm willing to change, but I still want to be me. Okay, that doesn't even make sense. And it's not just about marriage, it's about life in general. I feel like the way you show up in some places is the way you show up everywhere. So this is not just Ryan in marriage, this is Ryan in life. The problem is, in other situations, in other friendships, familial relationships, work, they're not challenging him. They don't really require him to level up. They are okay with surrounding him in the space that he's in. You don't have to change for your parents. You don't have to change for coworkers. You might amend something for work. You don't have to change for friends. It's like, love me or leave me, and they love you. Who cares? For a relationship, even if you're a great person, there are certain, bends that you have to take in order to fit into that relationship with someone else. So this relationship is requiring him to level up. He keeps saying he's not been in relationships or healthy ones, so he really doesn't know what he's doing, which on one end I would have patience for if he didn't use that as a crutch. So in finding out what your negative characteristics are, or what things keep you from being in a relationship, you also have to, if you know it, you also have to be aware of not using it as a crutch and always operating from a victimized standpoint. So, well, I don't do well in relationships, so that's why I don't do well in relationships. Well, the fact that you can even say you don't do well in relationships is enough to do well or even better in a relationship, because you have acknowledged it. You're not oblivious. To be in oblivion is like, oh, okay, great, I don't even know what's happening. But he's not oblivious anymore. So in not doing well and acknowledging and knowing you don't do well, what are you going to do about it? And continuously saying I don't do well in relationships isn't good enough, because you're now in a relationship. he comes home from guys night, which I'll get to, and he kind of changes a story that really was not the case. And I think he has been drinking, recurring theme. So in the back of my mind, which I thought a few weeks ago, like, do you have a drinking problem because you've been drinking the last few weeks, or your tendency is when you get frustrated is to drink, which is concerning for me. So that's something to look at as well. You don't have healthy coping skills. You're not just having a good time and going out and drinking with the guys. You drink a lot and then you come home drunk. You don't deal well with it. A couple of weeks ago, she said he came home very angry, and then he went back out and he drank some more. So like now that's like a red flag for me. I'm not gonna go ahead and say he has a drinking problem, but it's like a recurring theme, and we're watching everybody else drink on the show, and nobody else is seeming to have these issues. So that's frustrating for me, where he's not really coherent and coping well. And because of that, you can see her instantly kind of be annoyed. And so she is annoyed and she kind of walks away and she cleans up and she leaves. Ryan meets later on with his friend and changes the story around. He doesn't say it in the way that it's, authentic. It's more self-serving. So I have no idea why she did this, or she just did this. It came out of nowhere. She didn't explain herself. And it's really frustrating to see, because if he would have said it the way that it happened, he could have still had questions. He's allowed to have questions and have feelings, but they're inauthentic because he's not being honest. So moving on. Well, I'll wrap up with them. I'm concerned about the two of them, because I think that he is now, and he says he's now questioning if he can be in a relationship with her and move forward. And he basically, in a nutshell, alludes to the fact that because she said something essentially that was off-putting to him and made him think that she's not committed, now he's not committed, and that the last couple of weeks have been really difficult for him. And that's really only because she's been calling him to the carpet about his behavior that isn't conducive to the marriage. So what are you really here for? It's just very adolescent, and I continue to get this adolescent experience from Ryan. So with the two of them, I'm not really sure. Something has to change. I just really don't want her to live in a fairy tale, because it's like clear as day to everybody who can see that he's not really into doing what it takes to actually be married and be married successfully. So that's Ryan and Jackie. Individually, I think he is doing poorly, and I'll explain even more. I mean, I've already explained it. Individually for Jackie, I'm struggling with her too, because now I think she like has rose-colored glasses because they're in a good space in that moment, and I want her to be more aware of what's going on. It doesn't mean that their entire time has been bad, but this time really is not good. The overarching symbol is not like positive. It's kind of like, it's off-putting. So I kind of want her to dive in and see that, and then continue to call him to the carpet, because that will challenge him to either step up to the plate and make some changes, or leave her alone. Either way, it'll be to her benefit and to the benefit of the marriage. So they get together for girls' night and guys' night. Girls' night happens at Jackie's house. And it's great to see once again that they get together and they're actually establishing these friendships and sharing and talking about, all the things they're going through. Shawniece is kind of glowing about kind of the strides that her and Jephte are making. Molly's still a little apprehensive, but she's kind of still in the same place. So not much has changed. It's not a negative or a glowing positive. It just is, but it's pretty baseline, and it's not terrible. So I'd say, it's pretty good. It's pretty average. You can see Jackie start to kind of question her experience with Ryan, and that's just from the validity of all the experiences that we've been seeing. So they kind of have that dynamic and talk about how they felt when they first met, etc., etc. With the guys meet, at this bowling alley / bar. They're having drinks, shooting pool, and Ryan is talking about how Jackie wants him to sublet his apartment, and she wants to sublet the apartment so they can move on together. A clear indication that she's committed, she's willing to move forward, that she obviously wants to continue the marriage beyond the experiment, and that she's thinking of the future, thinking of them as a unit. He does not want to do that. He also has 2 roommates, and he at first makes it seem as if it's about his 2 roommates and not wanting to leave them high and dry, but that would, subletting would take care of that. And so he's talking to the guys about how Jackie wants him to do that and he's not really comfortable, and he makes it all about the guys. And then they kind of bring it up like, well, it also might seem like you might have a plan B. And he says, she thinks I have a plan B, but it's not about that. But then later on in the same conversation, he says, but it's not about that, but it is a little bit about that. Like, that is a good thing. So he's like 1 foot in, 1 foot out, and the absolute nerve of him to be 1 foot in, 1 foot out when he's really not that great. It was frustrating to see because, here she is continuing to charge on, hoping that her commitment will show him something. And he's not really doing his part. And it's not because she's off-putting or super challenging or disrespectful or, whatever the case may be. She is just doing regular stuff, expecting regular things. And he is kind of holding his apartment just in case, but and joking about it as if this isn't like a real thing. And so what I loved seeing was how John and Jephte kind of really went after him and said, these are not really good things. You're acting like a teenager, doing this is like an absolutely not, you need to be thinking of your wife. You need to, even his friend, when he went to dinner with them, is talking about sharing with his wife what he's thinking instead of just doing or not doing and not letting her in, because then it looks exactly like what it is, because it doesn't look like he wants to keep it as a plan B. He is keeping it as a plan B. So he's expecting these things from her and he's not willing, he's giving even less and less. Like, I feel like Ryan 5 weeks ago, at least he could pretend to be, into the marriage and willing to be flexible. And every single week it's a decline and an exposure to who he really is. They start talking about something about Ryan and Jackie, and Jephte says, do you think your wife respects you? And I think the way that he was asking was a general question, but of course Ryan takes it and twists it, and when he brings it back to Jackie, it turns into a narcissistic self-serving question, which really frustrated me because you can't trust him. And even the conversation he has with his friend at dinner is also skewed to where it makes it self-serving. So you can't really trust what he's saying, and he really didn't answer the question. He doesn't really answer the questions. He says what needs to be said just to make him look like he's actually participating in this life, but he's not. And he's getting more and more recluse and committed to his single self, and also using I've never been married as, the crutch as to why he pretty much sucks at it. And it has nothing to do with not having to be married. A lot of people who are married hadn't been married, and you figure it out as you go. But are you willing? Do you have an open heart? Do you have an open spirit? Are you willing to do what it takes to build a life with someone? And I mean, he is matched with someone who requires very little, like very little. So it doesn't look good. And I don't think I've even ever said that really as I've watched the show. I have. I have, but I've been trying not to say it this whole season because I really want it to work out. The thing is, it's still fixable, but does he want it to be fixed? If he really calls himself to the carpet and says, hey, self, this is what I really want. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I'm not going to look at it as a loss, but as a gain. And I just gain different things, and I kind of put things away. I put childish games away, and I gain, certain things. If he looks at it like that and he really wants it, he can have it. But he's not really doing that. And so, like I said last week, you can't be with somebody who doesn't want to be with you, or who doesn't want to be with anyone. He seems to kind of prioritize his friends more than anything. It's all about the guys. He even says, I told her I can't give up the guys. What? Okay. I'm going to leave my comments to myself on that. So it's really frustrating to see that he's not really taking the experiment well. And you can just, when you're excited for people to get together and you hope that they find love, it's frustrating to see them taking it for granted when there's so many people who really want it, and so many people who weren't picked for the show that would give their all for the show. So that's about it. I hope you enjoyed it as usual. Somebody actually asked me what I thought singles needed to know if they wanted to do this show. So I'm gonna do a video literally off the top of my head about what I think people need to look in, because I think based on watching these seasons, people really want the show based on what they think it's gonna be, and then it ends up being something different, of course, and it comes as a culture shock. So I'm gonna do that very soon, and I will be posting that. But as usual, if you loved it, subscribe and comment, let me know your thoughts, and I'll see you next week. Everyone have a great week.